Jackie, you may begin. Jackie, you may begin.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome on behalf of the U.S. Commercial Service, the Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York District Export Councils. We welcome all of you to the first of 5 Trade Talk Tuesdays in this month of November. We are going to be focusing throughout the month on global trade finance. Today's topics is an SBA overview of programs and services. My name is Jacqueline Torsellini, and I'm an international trade specialist with the U.S. Commercial Service out of the Middletown, Connecticut office. I'm joined today by my colleague Anthony Sargis, who also resides in Connecticut and is a senior commercial officer out of the Connecticut office. And today we're lucky to have with us Joe Raycraft from the Small Business Administration. And before I introduce Joe, I'd just like to get some housekeeping items out of the way. Today's program is going to be recorded. And as you can see from this first slide, if you can please keep your cameras off, it just helps with the bandwidth and to make sure everything runs smoothly. If you have any questions during the presentation, please pop them into the Q&A feature, and we will address them as appropriate. Anything left over, we're happy to address at the end of the session. And just because today's session is so short, apologize for moving through things so quickly, but we want to make sure Joe has time to provide you with as much information as possible. And please expect the recording of today's session and any associated paperwork to be sent out to you tomorrow. So without ado, I'd like to introduce Joe Raycraft with the Small Business Administration. He is the Export Finance Manager for the New England region. In this role, Joe is responsible for providing trade finance expertise and technical guidance to the business and lending communities while promoting the SBA's export financing programs to exporters and lenders. Joe is based out of the Hartford, Connecticut office of the SBA, and he brings over 20 years of private sector business experience, including international roles in the areas of manufacturing, commercial finance, and commercial lending. Most of Joe's experience is in international with a focus on the marketing, origination, underwriting, and financing of international projects. So he has a lot of insight that he can provide and will be a great resource for everybody here. So without further ado, Joe, turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks for having me today. Pleasure to be here. I'm going to jump right in. So today's Trade Talk Tuesday is talking about providing kind of an overview of SBA's export programs and services that are available to small businesses. So quickly for today's agenda, I'm going to cover 3 things. First is going to be just kind of, how does the SBA define exporting, and what's the difference between a direct export and indirect export? I'll also give an overview of the export programs and services that SBA provides, and those include, things like business counseling, grant funding for exporters, and then also SBA's export lending programs. I'll do a deeper dive into one of our programs, Export Express, which is an ideal program for smaller exporters or companies that are just getting into exporting. And then followed by a couple of case studies at the end, just to give you, to demonstrate how the Export Express program has been used in specific cases. So the main takeaway, I think, today is, there's going to be a lot of information. Feel free to reach out to me or even the Commerce Department if you have any questions on any of this. My contact information will be at the end of the slide deck. And again, the main takeaway is that, we're here to support exporters. We want to do everything possible to support you. I never want to hear of a case where a company was not able to execute an export contract because of the lack of financing. So with that, let's just jump in. This first slide talks about, defining what an export is in terms of SBA's definition. And you can see here, export transaction, it's the production and payment associated with the sale of goods or services to a foreign buyer. I would just extend on that a little bit and say that any export of goods or services should be directly from the US to the overseas buyer. I mentioned at the beginning this concept of indirect exporting, and that's a situation where your customer, you're selling to a customer and they may be incorporating either your service or product into their ultimate service or product that is exported to the overseas buyer. One of my examples, case studies at the end, will include an indirect export example. But again, this is something kind of like supply chain related. Your company makes a widget, you sell to company A, sells to company B takes your product, creates its own, and then they export directly. Your company would be eligible for an export loan from the SBA because of that indirect exporting concept. So a couple things to be aware of using the SBA programs. So the exporter must satisfy the general 7A rules of the SBA. So the applicant has to be located, in the US and primarily operate from the US. The loan proceeds must be used exclusively to benefit the US company and the US operations. And then third, the business has to be at least 51% owned by a US citizen or legal permanent residents. The only other thing I would add to this is in terms of eligibility, companies that produce items that might be military or defense related, those are eligible for SBA funding. There's other programs that, like the Export-Import Bank, does not support military and defense type exports. So that's a nice use of the program. So what transactions aren't eligible? Sales to prohibited countries, and you can easily find this out by going to the Export-Import Bank's website. They've got a country limitation schedule there, and you want to make sure that these are countries where the US can legally do business. Note 7 in the Exim Bank country limitation schedule, those are the countries where the US is not able to do business. Also, no sales to OFAC sanctioned parties. OFAC is the Office of Financial, I don't remember the rest of the acronym, but there's a website for OFAC and you can check to see the names of the individual owners and company names to determine whether or not they're OFAC parties or not. And then there's 2 NAICS codes that the SBA's export programs do not apply to. And those would be accommodations, kind of like a hotel type situation, and believe it or not, gas stations. And I'll just have a note here on importers. The export programs do not apply to importers. However, SBA's other 7A programs are completely open. So most companies, if they're an importer, would be eligible for general 7A financing through the SBA. So these 3 things, these are really the overview of the export programs that SBA provides. Number 1, business intelligence. This is really, business advising and different key resource partners that we can connect a company to for various, export related needs. And I'll touch on each of these in separate slides. Number 2, grant financing or grant funding to reach international buyers. This is a great program that's most states have, and it helps to provide reimbursable grants to small businesses to help support specific export-related costs. And third is the financing side of things. These are the three export loan programs that the SBA has: Export Express, Export Working Capital Program, and International Trade Loans. Today, I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the Export Express program. So I mentioned kind of the business intelligence and connecting companies with specific resource partners. SBA has a fast track service. You can access this via an 800 number or by email, international@sba.gov. So if you're a business that has some sort of export related issue, you can reach out to the SBA directly, and they'll help either, point you in some direction or provide you with some details regarding your specific issue, or connect you with some resource partners. That could be the U.S. Export Assistance Centers, an SBDC, Small Business Development Center, SCORE advisors, or even the Export-Import Bank, depending on what your specific challenge is. Some of the things that they can help with: trade-related issues, trade disputes. If your company has questions about specific trade agreements and how to take advantage of those. Also, harmonized tariff codes if you need some help understanding what code is appropriate for your product. And then also, specific market and industry data. They can probably connect you with some good websites where you can get good data with respect to your specific product or industry. So I kind of think of this as kind of a one-stop shop, where SBA may not be able to answer all your questions, but they'll be able to put you in contact with an expert that can assist. And these services are, for the most part, free of charge. So the grants that are available to small businesses, this is really, I call it a bonus program, because it's grant funding, and it provides grants to small businesses to help them develop what I call their export infrastructure. So these grant programs, it's referred to as STEP, State Trade Expansion Programs. Most of the states have these programs. They're funded by the SBA, but managed by each state. At the bottom of the slide, you can see sba.gov/STEP. You can go there to find out if your state has a STEP program, and you can find their website there for your state, and also you'll understand what the program guidelines are and the application requirements. So just talking generally about the STEP program and the eligible uses of funds, generally the most popular would be participation in trade shows. So it helps offset some of those costs, whether it be an international show or even a domestic show that has an international kind of focus. It can also be used for, translating your website, or optimization of your website to accommodate e-commerce sales, fees for shipping product samples overseas. Sometimes that's associated with a trade show. Compliance testing for an existing product. That's something that's eligible. We've got a new use of funds this year, which is for export credit insurance premiums. The STEP program can be used to offset those. So I would encourage you to look at your state. If you have questions about, if your state has a program or not, certainly feel free to reach out to me, and I can connect you with the appropriate people in your state. But it's just a super program to help companies that are either exporting already or just getting into exporting. So this slide gives an overview of our three financing programs. The first one in red, Export Working Capital Program. This is our flagship export working capital related program that supports financing of specific export related orders. It's great for experienced exporters with higher working capital needs. The loan size is up to $5 million. So this is, just a great program for both small, medium, and larger businesses. The international trade loan is also up to a maximum of $5 million. And these are really flexible term loans. It's not short-term working capital, but term loans for the purpose of expanding a company's export business. So if a company has some longer term needs, maybe they require some financing for fixed assets, equipment. We could also include some permanent working capital in there, debt refinancing, and business acquisitions is a new use of proceeds for the export program. So those are things that we can look at. With the international trade loan, there is a requirement that there be an export business plan. And later on in the presentation, I'll provide some guidance on what needs to be included in that plan. The Export Express program is the one I'll go a little bit more into detail on. I like this program a lot because it's so flexible. It's kind of a combination of the export working capital and international trade loans. So I think it's a good program to go over for a group of exporters. Again, it's up to $500,000 maximum loan size. So really ideal for smaller companies or even companies that are just getting into exporting. And it can be used for multiple purposes. It can be used for a short-term working capital line of credit to support growing exports. And it can also be structured as a term loan if you require financing for, let's say, equipment or other types of fixed assets. And now is a great time, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, all SBA loans of $350,000 and less, starting October 1st, there's zero guarantee fees, zero ongoing servicing fees. So great time for small businesses to access SBA financing. Export Express, as I said, very flexible, one program, multiple uses. As I mentioned, term loans, so we can do equipment purchases. With that, we can include some permanent working capital to support that new equipment and the purchase of inventory. Real estate purchases or build outs would be eligible. And then on the short-term side, there's lines of credit, revolving lines of credit with up to 7-year terms. The export line of credit can be used 70% for exports, and a small portion, up to 30%, can be used for domestic. So if you're primarily an exporter, but you also do some domestic work, that might be a good option for you. And the export finance managers like myself, there's many throughout the country. We're always available to work directly with an exporter or with your lender to help kind of review situations and work with the lender to provide you with the most appropriate type of financing for your situation. And here's the SBA guarantee fees. I mentioned this before. In red, you can see for any loans that are $350,000 or less, there's zero guarantee fee. As you go above the $350,000, you can see for the term financing, there is a guarantee fee. It's got a little bit of a discount off of the normal fees. And then on the annual servicing fee, again, there's zero financing or zero service fees for loans 350 and under. And then we mentioned that export business plan, how to prepare for a discussion for your bank. So these are just a couple of questions to consider and maybe put down into a 1 or 2 page document, just to show your lender, who's your trusted advisor, that you really know your business, you know what you're doing internationally, you know where you're selling, just kind of answering the who, what, when, where, why of the business. And these are the things that the lender is going to want to really understand. So by providing this information up front, you're going to save yourself a lot of time in the process. And you can also Google an SBA Export Business Planner if you want to see a more detailed type business plan. But these will kind of get you pretty far into your business plan. The only other additional information you're going to need is probably like a 12-month revenue projection and also some cash flow projections. So lastly, I have a couple of case studies. Before I get there, this just kind of shows the Export Finance Manager map. There's 21 of us throughout the country. So if you're from outside of New England, you can certainly go to sba.gov/international and you can find the person that that is in your area to work with. I'll take questions, but in the meantime, let's just take a look at one of these case studies. So here we have a building supplier distributor that's located here in the Northeast, relatively small business, just under 3 million in sales. And most of this company's revenue is domestic. And so their international orders were supported typically using their own asset-based line of credit that their bank had, that they had with their bank. But the company was growing; its export needs were getting, increasing. So the company was looking for a $150,000 specific line of credit just to support its exports. So the bank looked at this; they were able to put together an Export Express $150,000 line of credit that would allow them to kind of manage and support their international buyers. So that's kind of one example. Second example here is this is a good example of indirect exporting and how Export Express can be used for that. Again, this is a manufacturer. They make in the Midwest, they make components that go into cars. And again, small company, just over 1 million in sales. And they were in need of working capital to support a specific contract that it had with Ford. And the company was producing these goods that were, they know that these vehicles that they were producing the goods for were being exported. They were going to Mexico. There was kind of a 2-month lead time in executing the contract, and they needed that financing, that working capital financing, to support the contract with Ford. So we're able to provide them with a $200,000 Export Express line of credit. They were able to get the Export Express because we knew that Ford, we did obtain documentation that these goods were ultimately going to be exported in the form of vehicles to Mexico. So the borrower used the line, they satisfied and executed the contract, and then they established an Export Express line of credit for general uses once that export contract was completed. So I think we're pretty close on time, Jackie. So I think I'll stop there. And if any questions have come up in the chat, happy to cover those.
Thank you so much, Joe. That was a great overview. And I don't see any questions right now in the Q&A, but we'll certainly wait a minute or two and see if anybody pops anything in there. And please feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. Joe would be happy to answer. And we do have Joe's contact information, and then this slide is just outlining for all the participants the upcoming programming that we'll have during the month of November. And again, the focus is global trade finance for anybody who is interested.
And if there are questions, if people want to reach out directly to me by email or telephone, feel free. I'm around, happy to work with you.